Okay, but you'll have to hold it for 40 minutes. Okay, can you hear me now? Thank you. So, well, good morning again and welcome back from Chai Coffee and those delicious biscuits. It's my honor to introduce the second keynote. She's forbidden me to read her bio. So I'm only allowed to say that Professor Ipshita Chanda is a professor in the Department of Comparative Literature at FLU here in Hyderabad. And the title of the talk is Words Don't Stay Still, Text as Practice and the Politics of Textuality, Orality, Dyad. Welcome, ma'am. Or this, it's working.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, a privilege, and an honor to be here. I've actually been associated with the Oral History Association from the time it was formed. But I mean, and that is, I won't call it a fragmented personal memory because it is part of the history of the Oral History Association. And also, before I begin, I'm sorry to disappoint my old friend Indira Chaudhary, because I thought that listening is one of the salient things that you should not be talking about in a meeting of the Oral History Association, because everybody knows that without listening, there can be no oral history. But I will sort of reflect on exactly what the title says. And I'll make this small correction, Swati. Words, it's not that they don't stay still, they will not stay still. So words will not stay still. And that comes from T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton, fragments actually. And Eliot says, words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still. I begin with Eliot's reflections on the word's instability, because I would like to shift the focus from the neat categorization of fixed meaning to the uncertainty of situation and experience. From epistemology to ontology, from text as object or condition to text as practice, namely the textual practice of reading and writing as human acts. I thought that the importance of listening would be passé in this gathering because that is the primary tool of oral historians. So to speak of listening in a meeting of oral historians would be, one would say in Bangla, Mayer kache mashir golpo bola, translating that's called telling stories about my maternal aunt to my mother. And among the Igbo would say that that's the mourners weeping louder than the bereaved. However, since morning, the most important thing I think that we have heard, even though the word listening perhaps was not mentioned, is the process of co-construction, which cannot be done without listening. So these memoirs of co-construction of Jahanara ka basaya hua nagar, and then the reports across time from different people and their recollection record also the history of the movement from the katta houses to the concrete through the experiences of people, and they become history because those experiences were enunciated to someone who was listening. So before contextualizing experience in philosophical terms, I would like us to remember the political power of the human act of language. And I quote here Muhammad Sarr, a Senegalese novelist, who says in the novel Brotherhood, which I will refer to later, he says, one never truly measures the extent to which every war is also perhaps mainly an initiative of destruction through the manipulation of language. Words are distorted to comply with people's passions and used as rhetoric to express conflicting goals, which are all still alike in their allegiance to violence. The human act of language and the human use of technology, which underline the politics of what Ngugi wa Thiong'o calls aesthetic feudalism, which overdetermine the real world where oral and written coexist as a hierarchy rather than as a dyad. In an essay entitled The Oral Native and the Writing Master, as part of his Wellick Lectures of 2012, using the figures of the oral native and the writing master, Ngugi defines aesthetic feudalism as looking at the oral through the eyes of the written. There are two primary points I want to make with respect to this overdetermination in our thinking and in our scholarly practice, which results in a hierarchy wrought by technology. Writing is a technology used for composition, preservation, and transmission of language. Language, which is the medium of our intersubjectivity. As a human capability, language is radically democratic. There are no natural hierarchies that divide language or its use. But the human's location in the world, her existence in relation to its alterity and its plurality, leads to the singular use of language that means and conveys meaning to an addressee. Language is not an object or a given. It is a set of shared arbitrary conventions which comes into being only in a concrete situation of use. As human beings, we all have the power of speaking, but what technique and technology we have the opportunity and the will to use is dependent on our position in the power structure. The hierarchization of the difference between the oral and the written does not stem only from literacy or the lack of it. It is also rooted in the perceived difference between an inert object, the book, and the animate organism, the body. Is it less difficult to destroy an object than it is to destroy a body? From the disappearance of languages, ways of living, and ways of being, we might think that it is easier to preserve the object and protect it from harm, easier than it is to preserve and protect the mortal human body. This objectification of the written word is based upon the value ascribed to reading and writing as technologies. It is deemed mysterious because it is a secondary skill, withheld from many. It is deemed to defy time and interrogate the metaphysics of presence, artificially buttressed by capital and technology, established by copyright, law, and our theorization of the intentionality and forms of construction. In beginning with the idea of textuality and orality as a dyadic condition, I want to question both division and hierarchization between these seemingly disconnected and discrete worlds, with the idea of text as practice or performance in place of text as object, basing my premise on the fact that language is a human capability, a human activity, and the medium of our relation with the world, whether the relation is with entity or object. To return to Eliot for a moment, words are not unstable. Their meanings are context dependent and their use a human activity. So they will, as Eliot says, not stay still, or in the places designated for them by human force, social, religious, or economic. A theory of utterance is a theory of creativity, whether it be spoken, written, or read. Every utterance is the result of a dynamic between addresser and addressee, and entails a relation between them, as well as a change in what or who they are. Language is the medium through which we connect to the world, the medium of our intersubjectivity. In positing the text as practice, I move from the work as object to the work as text. I do not see textuality as characterized by writing, and neither do I see orality and textuality in a historical continuum or as spatially demarcated. In fact, I suggest that our unconscious mental hierarchization of the written and the oral, this aesthetic feudalism that Ngugi notes, is the cause for the collapse of prehistory and history into oral and written. From there, it is but an easy step to the hierarchy of primitive, civilized, ancient, modern, all operations that tell us more about our use, abuse, and manipulation of the power of utterance than about language itself. From this point of view, I would address the issues of intentionality and responsibility. which foreground the ethics of engagement in any utterance, oral or written. These are questions of located language use in an interconnected world, where the oral and the written as means of transmission and preservation coexist, albeit in a hierarchy of our own making, a political situation which I will try to flag for the rest of this discussion. The interconnectedness of the written and the oral, their historical relations in a particular society are indicated by Ngugi and his compatriots, Tabanlo Leong and Anyumba, in their proposal of 1978 to abolish the English department in the newly decolonized world and replace it with literary studies. They noted the interlinked nature of art forms in traditional practice and proposed that local literatures and oratures should be at the center of the literary studies curriculum. The theoretical category of orature subverts, according to Ngugi, aesthetic feudalism and posits utterance as a relational phenomenon. The history of this word is traced by Ngugi to the Ugandan linguist Pio Zirimu, who coined it as an alternative to the oxymoron oral literature, and also questioned the assumed inferiority of the oral to the literary arts, rejecting the binary between literate and illiterate that formed the basis of power hierarchies in any stratified society, be it class society, racist society, patriarchal society, or underdeveloped society. Ngugi pointed out that the real difference was between literate and orate. Both were connected by the word and not oppositional absolutes. Through this, he was able to turn our thinking to language as an event of relating to the world through utterance, whether oral or written. Further theorization of orature as a concept occurred in the work of South African sculptor and poet Pitika Ntuli, who reacted against the atomization of life and culture in Western bourgeois society, where the primacy of the individual overshadowed his relational being and location in a community of others. The very existence of the oral and the written is the source of the hierarchy between them. What Ngugi calls the literary colonization of orality is a political residue of colonization and leads us to ignore the power associated with different media of language use, attributed to whichever one happens to be the weapon of hegemony in that society. Inevitably, the other end of the binary becomes the flag of resistance, indicating how politics breaks and rearranges the dyad of oral and written. Ngugi himself elaborates a worldview where material and abstract are interconnected and states that in all the Bantu languages, the being of phenomenal nature, nurture, thought, and spirit are connected. While agreeing with this interconnected worldview, I submit that this is not a feature of Bantu languages alone, but of language use per se, which is located in concrete time and space in order to make meaning. In other words, no language is essentially reflective of this connection, but to quote Shakespeare, thinking makes it so. This emphasizes the primary point I began with, that language is a human capacity and meaning is located, giving rise to questions of ethics and responsibility. And here I will briefly address the question of history that came up in the previous session, of history being reduced to fragments through oral sources. I will return to a salient issue, which to my mind arises from our unconscious hierarchization between orate and literate cultures. How can the same language be the medium of history, which claims to be backed by evidence, as well as of fiction, which is the polar opposite of fact, and is not obliged to provide evidence for what is imagined in it? I raise this question in a gathering of oral historians, for whom precisely this specificity of use is the ethical and political issue underlying their practice, method, and conceptual frame. I suggest that the very idea of history is perhaps continuous and emphatically written, and we associate the personal, limited view with an oral account. The question I want to keep in view is the historical narrative is also a humanly constructed narrative. Who connects the fragments in a written history? I agree that history must be backed by evidence and is emphatically not a personal account. But who chooses the facts to be selected and which are to be marginalized? Is not the hierarchy of the written and the oral working here in favor of continuity and institutionalization against fragmentation and episodic narration? Are these not constructed hierarchies through which we view the world rather than some natural given difference? If we turn to the discourse of experience, which was introduced into sociology by the standpoint theorists, claiming that personal narratives in the woman's voice was from the woman's standpoint backed by evidence, so the historian gave access to feminine direct experience in contrast to masculine abstract theory. Influenced by Marxism, the standpoint theorists located the life narratives of women within the context of class, caste, and gender. This revealed differences that shaped and yielded a vast variety of gendered experience, leading to a questioning of the homogeneity of the category woman, which would be lost if we don't address what appears to be fragmented because it does not collapse into a grand narrative. The narratives of experience served to question the generalization of theory. Individual lived experience, accessed through located personal narratives of women, was posited as the basis for situated knowledge. Thus, standpoint feminists argued that experience was the source of knowledge and posited the subject constructed as the result of relations between world and self, rather than as absolute or transcendent. But what generalizable factual truth can we glean from individual unique experience? The truth that we get from facts is tied to objectivity and supposed to be accessible through the methods of science. Knowledge is what we believe to be true. Our belief is justified by objective facts, that objects exist in the world independent of our perception of them. Experience, on the other hand, is singular and original. It is available only through a medium, which is constructed by us. Whether we take responsibility for this construction or not becomes an ethical question. The word we use to name the experience may be the same, but what the word connotes to each of us, and hence what that experience means to each, may yet be distinct. This alerts us to the heterogeneity of truth itself. Science demands objective truth. Historical narrative demands evidence. But can experiential accounts, which must be subjective, yield these truths? Some oral historians claim that they are searching for truth behind the fact. How are fact and truth distinct from one another? Factual truth and experiential truth are not necessarily coterminous. A great deal of confusion, and here I quote the philosopher Said Said, a great deal of confusion in the contemporary theories of truth is due to a failure to realize this fact and the consequent misdirected attempt to ascribe some of the virtues of the latter kind of truth to the former. The reason for this probably lies in an anxiety about getting a correct description of the world. My question is, whose world and of what kind? The objective world which exists without our intervention, or the world I am conscious of, which Husserl calls the life world that cannot exist without the subject. Spatiotemporal objects forming my own world exist independently of my subjective perspective and the particular experiences that I undergo. They must, in other words, be conceived as part of an objective reality. They reflect social conventions, norms, values, and rules of discourse. This objective reality is the common ground of experience for all those who share my life world. A commonly perceived object lies outside the viewing subject's mind, existing independently of her perspective. Anything that we know beyond our own experience comes from our ability to understand the subject relative world of an other who shares my horizon. The real world is intersubjectively known, though subjectively experienced. The idea of intersubjectivity is founded on the ethics of engagement and responsibility. The co-constitution of world or tradition and self or individual entails that objective reality is intersubjectively constituted. I will not pontificate to oral historians on their sources, which coexist in time with the historian and are co-constructed with the historian's participation as listener. The oral historian and the narrator participate in an intersubjective construction of the real, and the location of the subject in relation to it, Husserl's subjective relative life world, which forms the grounds for objective scientific research. Feminist epistemology, battling against a gendered hierarchy, which stratifies rather than interconnects the oral and the written, has emphasized one form of knowledge production over another, based on the dichotomy between fact and experience. But from the methods of the oral historian, we learn that even without hierarchizing the oral and the written, we may understand how a life world of connected subjects cannot be replicated, but leaves its sediment for the future, creating what Gadamer would call a historical tradition. Understanding is always in relation to the self. This is the meaning of Gadamer's insight about the fusion of horizons. This implies that understanding is a function of subjectivity in the Kierkegaardian sense. There is no such thing as objective understanding. The notion of objectivity is related only to knowledge. Perhaps we can think that historical hermeneutics, as Gadamer defines it, does not aim at knowledge at all, but at understanding, which cannot be reduced to systematic or theoretical frames. Gadamer develops the idea of understanding as conversation. The capacity for listening and the willingness to engage together constitute the conditions for historical hermeneutics. As Merleau-Ponty points out, the observed also observes us and judges us from behaviors of which we are not even aware. Our existence is relational and hence political. Each of our acts is a relation to the world we inhabit, for which we each have and must take responsibility. Technology has given us the means to transform the oral into the written through the textual practice of writing and through the ever more sophisticated mechanics of recording the voice. But utterance, whether written or oral, remains an embodied, conscious human act, concretized in responsible use of language by human beings. If we assume the positivism of historical method and narrative, we overlook conveniently the textual practice which gives rise to the historical narrative itself. But if we rid ourselves of the idea of text as object and the cultural and historical hierarchy between the techniques of speaking and writing, and focus instead on the text as practice, then we may appreciate the dyadic nature of oral and written expression. Pierre Nora's critique of the positivism of historical method originates in the discursive hierarchy between the written and the oral. And when Amma Ataidu says time is nothing until you give it something to carry, she pictures memory itself as a process of textualization, a human activity as much as speaking or writing or listening. Time preserved in narrative or time lived through the body. The relationship between phenomena as we perceive them and science which claims to explain the general reasons for these phenomena is described by Merleau-Ponty as the relationship of landscape and map. Scientific information is like a map drawn for certain movements in relationship to the landscape in which we have learned what is a forest, a meadow, or a lake. What these things are, independent of our perception of them, may be shown on the map, but what they mean to us is how we perceive them in relation to the landscape of the subjective relative life world which we inhabit. The relation between the oral and the written depends on our worldview, whether we perceive them as complementary, binary, or dialectical, whether we perceive them as historically continuous or naturally hierarchized. We have constructed it as such, and we must take responsibility for the construction. This is not a battle between writing and orature or oral traditions, nor a battle between oral sources of history and documents, but between human intentionalities and responsibilities. And this connects political choice of medium and technology to the question of ethics. Is it easier to preserve a material object, like books, than it is to preserve the mortal body, as both are receptacles of memory? A Senegalese proverb says, when a griot dies, an entire library is lost forever. In the novel Brotherhood by the Senegalese writer Mohamed Sarr, a fundamentalist brotherhood has taken over Calep, the northern part of Sumal, a francophone African state. Threatened by the publication of a clandestine journal that questions the religious bigotry with which the brotherhood terrorizes the inhabitants and brutally forces them to submit to its barbaric dictates, Abdul Karim, the commander of the fundamentalist forces, burns down the library of Bantika, which guarded the country's most beautiful treasure. And what was that beautiful treasure? I quote, rare documents, historical ones, secular ones, written by the elders, those that told the story of the birth of Sumal. These documents were undeniable proof against the racist and supremacist allegations made by some foreign theorists who had denied the existence of the continent's advanced civilizations. The documents were an astounding testimony, a birth certificate, a guarantee of identity. They were a way for the continent to assert itself with style and noise in the framework of history. They were proof that here too people had written. Yet, did they better preserve the memory of the past than the spoken word as the library burnt down? Sarr points to intentionality, to responsible human activity that undercuts both speaking and writing. And this has never been so nakedly clear as in the present, where history is sought to be rewritten by expunging what is spoken from the records. However, this piece of history remains preserved by facilitating embodiment with technology. The speeches that were expunged from Parliament contained the questions raised there and are available still to us through video footage where the evidence of embodied voice still remains. So technology, more advanced than writing, overturns the idea of the autonomous free text. But textual practice also gives rise to applications like deepfake, proving that the ethics of technology is the ethics of the human being, because language is a human act and hence political, and humans do not exist but in relation to the world of objects and entities that they inhabit. Politics introduces and controls technology and hence memory, whether oral or written. In Mahashweta Devi's story, Seed, Dulan Ganju, the most misanthropic man in Kuruda, sits brooding over his aloe-filled field, forced upon him by the landlord, Lachman Singh. Why does Lachman Singh give the field to Dulan? No one knows, not even Dulan, until Karan and Bulaki, young men of Kuruda village, disappear. They had been fighting against Lachman Singh for higher daily wages. That very night, Lachman Singh comes to the field and at gunpoint forces Dulan to dig the ground so that he can consign to its womb secrets that Lachman brings with him in a sack. Dulan's son Dhatua is a poet and singer. He plays the tuila and sings. Where has Karan gone? And Bulaki? Why is there no news of them? They are lost in the police files. Why is there no news of them? They are lost in the police files. Karan fought the 25 paise battle. Asharfi fought the 5 rupees 40 paise battle. Bulaki and Mohar fought alongside their elder brothers. All are lost in the police files. The song ends. Everyone is silent. Songs, not paddy seeds. Dulan becomes more irritable, more asocial, but he remains silent. Then one day, Dhatua, his son, disappears. Who has stolen the sleep from Dulan's eyes? His sleep is lost in the police files. Dulan's wife and Latua visit Tohri repeatedly to inquire at the Thana about Dhatua, not Dulan. He clears the land, sows seeds upon it, chanting like a mantra. I won't let you be aloe and putush. I'll turn you into paddy, Dhatua. Everyone comes to see the paddy crop, green and healthy, not like the chemical fertilizer-fed plants that they are used to seeing. But Lachman Singh also arrives. Son of a bitch, didn't I tell you not to farm this land, to leave it as a jungle? Dulan says, what was our agreement, Malik? That I shouldn't farm. You'll sow corpses and I'll guard them. Why? Otherwise, you'll burn down the village, kill my family. Very good. But Malik, 7 boys, 7. Is it right for only wild, thorny underbush to grace their graves? So I sowed paddy, you see. I won't let you go today, Malik. I won't let you harvest your crop. Shoot, burn houses, kill people. You've harvested enough. Lachman Singh's body is found in a ditch, his head smashed in by a stone. Then Dulan becomes a changed man, much calmer, almost happy. He distributes the paddy seeds from his harvest to everyone in the village. They promise that they will sow it, and Dulan stands on the embankment, looking at his land and things. Karan, Asharfi, Bulaki, Mahuban, Paras, and Dhatua. What amazing joy there is in the ripe green paddy nourished on your flesh and bones. Because you will be seed. To be seed is to stay alive. Slowly, Dulan climbs up to the machan, a tune in his heart. Dhatua made up this song. Dhatua. Dulan's voice trembles as he says the name. Dhatua, I have turned you all into seed. Bodies, whether speaking voices or writing hands, carry memory and the future. Because with human activity is associated the responsibility for the actions of speaking and writing that power politics tries to win, corrupt, conquer, or annihilate. In the world we inhabit, far removed in time, distance, and structure of feeling from Kuruda village, but not so far from the brotherhood-ruled Kalep, in a world we share with the disembodied poesis of ChatGPT, it is not a hierarchy or binary between writing and orality that we are forced to face and grapple with, but the question that lies buried beneath these, the ethical question of responsibility for language, for the acts of language, for the practices of interpretation, listening, and textualization, the ethics of engaging with alterity in the struggle for an equal world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for connecting so much of what we've been discussing the last day and a half. We're now open for questions. We have a good 15 minutes or so. So anyone wants to get us started? Yes, Indira.
That you actually emphasize that this is practice. This belongs to the world of practice and responsibility that comes with it. So thank you for that, because that's a very good reminder to oral historians, also to literary scholars, you know, because I think we often forget how much of it is practice and, you know, how important, therefore, within human acts, responsibility is. But it was a great pleasure to listen to you. Thank you very much.
I mean, I think that's one of the results of moving away, which is, yeah, thank you so much.
It was very scholarly, and every time I heard was speak, you are provoking me to think. D- Yeah. So you brought a point when you said text as practice and performance. It's important for us oral historians because if we conceptualize text as practice and performance, we also take into account the fact that perhaps no performance will be similar. Keeping that in mind, do you think that uh, there is a possibility for a text to be rewritten in a sense that there is a standard agreement on a particular topic and on a particular understanding there, and as oral historians, we are trying to open up multifarious accounts through which we can approach that particular topic. And how do you basically place the text when we have a tendency to unmake certain things?
Also introduce yourself since this is being live streamed.
Yeah,
and people can see.
I'm Shumalya Mukhopadhyay. I'm a member of the Oral History Association of India. Yeah.
I'm not sure that unmaking is such a great taboo. I have difficulty with this, rewritten kind of thing. The word re is something that Indira and I have contemplated for like many, many years now. And I've come to the understanding that at least, here, let me talk about literature only for the moment. There is no single reading of any literary text. That's impossible. That's one thing. And that is the challenge, I think, for oral historians. One of the reasons I sort of was excited about speaking here was precisely that I think people who work with oral accounts are always, we would say, they are at the risk of whichever position they take being assailed and challenged and perhaps even decimated. Many days of the week, continuously. And what I did not talk about here was my experience of doing 2 books based completely on interviews and conversations with people. And I learned that from there. That it's fine. So what? I don't understand. Like, why should anything be rewritten? I write it. You write it again. This whole idea of history being an institution, it's a narrative. It won't exist unless somebody writes it. That somebody has the responsibility of telling us what she has included and what she has left out. Because that is not, the way history is written, these questions arise. If that is what we had thought about it right from the beginning, that it's a conversation and not an institution, then these questions would not arise.
I had a question during the course of your presentation, but after you finished with the Mahashweta Devi story, it took me 5 minutes to process the entire thing and to reframe the question. I'm Srushti. I am an undergraduate student from University of Delhi. The 2 peculiar points you have mentioned that I could make sense of was, one is that understanding is the result of subjectivity. And you have also mentioned the point about human intentionality, that it's a battle between human intentionality versus responsibility. So what I see is that the concept of human intentionality and understanding or treating understanding as a subjective matter, they can be sometimes contradictory in nature. In the sense, when we talk about human intentionality and when we take orality as a major source of understanding past events and contemporary realities, we also refer to the concept of collective consciousness or collective memory. So where will you place this collective memory or this collective consciousness against one axis of oppression in your interpretation of understanding as subjective?
I think the mistake that I made was Well, I didn't think that it was necessary, because it's not really that understanding is the result of subjectivity. What I said was understanding cannot be objective. That is, I cannot leave my perspective out of understanding. Subjectivity is my relation to the world. Subjectivity is not a position, it is a relation. So I can act as a subject and objectify you. And as a subject, which is why I was stressing on the idea of intersubjectivity. That is, you are a subject when I'm addressing you. So whatever agency I accrue to myself, I give you as well. I mean, I'm sorry to say give, but I can't find a word for it at the moment. So intersubjectivity, I think, is something that replaces this idea of a collective consciousness. A collective consciousness leaves out everything that is unique to a person and only generalizes what is common to us. So I know that this is a very difficult idea to take at surface value, but then, I mean, intentionality again. Intentionality is not what I intend to do. It is my approach towards you. All of this comes from phenomenological philosophy. So these are very specific terms, which perhaps I should have, at least intentionality, I do understand now from your question that I should have defined it more precisely. But intentionality is my orientation towards you. And my orientation towards you is that you are a subject. That is the only way in which I can establish a conversation of an intersubjective relation. Now, everybody in a collective is going to have a perspective. These perspectives may coincide, they may overlap, but they are not the same, certainly, which is my problem with collective consciousness. Yeah, sure.
Just one supplementary question. Then how do we serve or how do we do justice to oral history as a tool of democratization of the academic discipline? If we do not take into account the concept of collective consciousness, and if we maintain, because you've also told that there is a primacy of individual in Western bourgeoisie societies, and which emphatically established the authoritativeness of textual sources.
Yeah, that I did say that, and deliberately, actually. The individual is not a discrete, abstract idea. The individual is a relation to someone else. I mean, I don't exist without you. Whether I acknowledge it or not is a different issue. So the entire discourse of individualism does not acknowledge that. And when it comes to collective consciousness, it will either generalize or add. You see? So that's why I think I did refer to the radical democracy of language. You and I have the same capacity. But if I treat you as an object, then you are not, I'm not listening to you, frankly. I'm only listening to what I think you are saying or what I want you to say, So it is basically, we are talking about agency and perspective and subjectivity, but all of these are relational. So we need to stop thinking in terms of us being discrete and being generalized or additive to us being in relation with the world, which I think I said a number of times, but I guess I should have emphasized the idea of listening. But like I was telling Indira, and like I said also in the beginning, I didn't think that I would need to say this here. I'm so sorry.
If there are no questions from the audience, I had not really a question, ma'am, but it's a thread that's been, sorry. So not really a question, but it's a thread that's again been building up in the last day and a half. And I was thinking from the scholars that you cited, from Senegal, Uganda, Kugi from Kenya, and then Mahashweta Devi, oral history in the context of anti-colonial solidarity and oral history as method in the context of, so do you want to say more about that?
No, really, because I think I said all that needed to be said. Reams can be written about this. This is another thing that Indira and I have been connected on for very, very many years. And the only thing that I want to say is, what happens is that when we talk in terms of opposition or resistance, inevitably what we quote are Western theorists, you know. So that is something that, I mean, my supervisor used to call that neo-colonial. That's again not a term that we have used. We have gone on to post-colonial and the global south and all of these, you know, feel-good labels, which don't actually tell the truth of what condition we are in. So, I mean, I think that is again a term that needs to be brought into the structure of discourse so that we are placed in our position as subjects is clear to us.
Any final questions? We have about a minute, but we could go on for a couple of minutes if there are any more questions. Comments? Silence is also fine, always fine.
Silence is very important.
Yeah.
How do you listen if you're not silent?
Yeah. I'll wait till 12:45 to close. You have a question? Great. Oh, compliment. Please take the mic.
Thank you very much, Ipshita. It's always nice to listen. Yeah. Thank you, Ipshita. It is always nice to listen to you. It was a wonderful presentation. I understand the need for, I was talking to her yesterday about there is a beauty to remember. And Avni's presentation was also there yesterday. You know that I will remember. मैं तो नहीं भूलूंगी. I will remember. It has, among all these threads, it is that what do you like the term still say processes which dehumanized. It is an answer like to humanize. We should be doing that. Thank you very much.
Everyone wants to get lunch, so let's close. Thanks very much. It's 12:45. We're right on time. Okay. Please.
So yeah, small announcement. We'll be breaking for lunch till 1:45, after which we'll be having 3 parallel sessions. 2 of the venues remain same. The third is the faculty meeting room. The volunteers will be at the guest house where the lunch is taking place, and they will, whoever wants to attend the presentation at the faculty meeting room, they'll guide you there. Thank you.